Coraline is a movie written and directed by Henry Selick, based on the novel by Neil Gaiman. And the following video is going to be a screenplay analysis, using both the actual script and, of course, the movie itself. And additional sources include the book and the video game for the PlayStation 2. Okay, maybe not those two, but anyway, let's continue. This analysis will deal with the following questions. What is the protagonist's want and the protagonist's need, and at what point are these established in the film? What are the external stakes? What are the internal stakes? What are the philosophical stakes? What represents the forces of external, internal, and philosophical antagonism? What are the 6 main points of the film? What are the opening and closing images of the film, and do they demonstrate some kind of change? So, with those questions in mind, let's just go along and take a look. And I'll explain these questions in further detail before answering them, of course. So, yeah, let's go ahead and look at this. What does the protagonists want and their need? Well, in most films, every character, or main character rather, has a want, and these protagonists usually get what they want, but it comes at a heavy price that fuels the film and ultimately forces the protagonist to figure out what their need is, and it's usually a lot different than what they wanted originally. So in the case of Coraline, I would say that Coraline has a lot of wants, so it's kind of hard to specify and pinpoint just one. But for the sake of this analysis, we'll just say that she wants to live in a world that's better than the one she's in, with her boring father and her short-tempered mother living in this 150-year-old decrepit house. This is emphasized when she reminisces on the past when she was happy, such as looking at the snow globes from all the vacations she had, and speaking to the picture of her friends that she hoped will visit one day. But this want is truly punctuated when she discovers the door to the other world in her dream. Now, we discover this door beforehand, but she can't really get into it because it's all bricked up. But we'll get to that later. As for her need, well, she got what she wanted by finding a world that's supposedly better than reality, only to find out that it's not better at all, and so now her need is to survive and end the vicious cycle of the other mother, aka the antagonist. This is established when Coraline is imprisoned with the other victims of the other mother, who explain everything and give exposition as to why they're here, yada yada yada. This exposition sort of fuels her need as she vows to not only escape, but to also free the souls of the other children as well, in addition to finding her parents. Okay, with that out of the way, let's move on to the stakes. And I'll explain each of these and what they mean in terms of storytelling. External stakes are pretty much like physical, tangible stakes and whatnot. So in the case of Coraline, it's sort of accepting reality versus being stuck in the dream world. The external being the boring, drab new location that she's moved to versus the superficial, perfect dream world that she comes to love before realizing that, yeah, it's probably time to leave. Internal stakes are not so much physical, but rather emotional, mental, and personal even. And there's a lot going on for Coraline in terms of internal stakes, specifically feelings of being loved and acknowledged versus feelings of being ignored and neglected. Because as we see in the movie, she feels ignored and neglected by her parents, who are just too busy to pay her any attention. But it's flipped when she gets to the other world, where she's always loved and always acknowledged, but of course it comes at a price. Last but not least, philosophical. These are way deeper than just thoughts and feelings, external, tangible things. Let's just look at it as dominant versus underdog values. I would say in the case of Coraline, the philosophical stakes are realistic and a healthy family love versus superficial and conditional family love. Now, when I say family, I don't necessarily mean just Coraline's parents, but rather the other characters that live at the Pink Palace, such as Bobinsky or even Wyborn and his grandmother, that sort of come together and whatnot. And on top of that, you have who these other neighbors are in the real world versus who they are in the other world. Alright, with the stakes in mind, let's check out who represents the forces of external, internal, and philosophical antagonism. Now, it's a bit difficult for this film, because for Coraline, there's sort of numerous antagonists that sort of act as obstacles for her to overcome. Like, yes, the main antagonist could arguably be the beldam and whatnot, but let's dig a little deeper than that. As for the external stakes, Coraline's fake parents definitely pose as antagonists for that, for keeping her in the other world and making sure she never returns to the real world. As for philosophical stakes, in terms of the other characters, meaning the dream world versions of the neighbors, they represent the too good to be true nature that overall resembles that superficial and conditional love and whatnot. As for Coraline's internal stakes, they're at first antagonized by her real parents, as they're clearly shown to be too busy to even acknowledge or care about Coraline. But by the end of the film, that's reversed, and they eventually give her the love and acknowledgement that she wants and needs, as opposed to her other parents, who were only giving it to her in exchange for basically devouring her soul, which is totally a realistic condition. Next up, we have the 6 main plot points of the film. And what are those 6 main plot points? Well, they are as follows. The opening image, which is sort of obviously one of the first opening images of the film, kind of tells you what you're in for within those first few minutes. Next up, we have that inciting incident, which is basically the event that flips the status quo world onto its back, and nothing's ever going to really be the same again because of this event and whatnot. And then we've got the break into two, which is basically just the protagonist accepting and choosing to go on the adventure after the inciting incident, and this break into two is essentially that adventure. Midpoint is not only literally just the halfway point for the movie, but it's also kind of the peak of the protagonist's adventure. Everything's going nice, everything's great, but at this point, usually in most cases, the only direction you can go is down. But fortunately, after reaching rock bottom, you can always climb back up to the climax, which is basically another high point of the film, where the protagonist basically overcomes the antagonist, destroys them, defeats them, overcomes the obstacles, ascends from that rock bottom point, and saves the day, essentially. Resolution is not just the end of the film, but also showing that character's return to the status quo world after it's been altered and changed by the inciting incident and the adventure that took place. And it's basically just like how things have changed and where will things go from this point. So, with those in mind, let's start over and go from the top. As for opening image, it's kind of a mixed bag, because this film sort of has 2 opening images. The first image being a credit sequence, which is pretty important and kind of foreshadows the rest of the events of the film. We see a doll that represents a victim of the other mother, and watch as she's transformed into the protagonist, or rather a doll that resembles the protagonist, and it's clear that this is some sort of dream world, and then the Coraline doll gets pushed out into space. Now, that is technically an opening image, but the true opening image, as according to the script, is a wide angle on a rambling old Queen Anne-style house with tacked-on outside stairs. It's late winter, the sky a damp gray sponge. A sign in the foreground reads, "Pink Palace, apartment for rent," which is this thing. Yep, that's the opening image. We can see that. It's pretty depressing and grim-looking, and we've already got the Hollywood cliche of a family moving into a new house, as demonstrated by the green moving truck. And yeah, things don't look too exciting, especially for Coraline. So after that business, we get to the inciting incident, and what this film does is pretty interesting, because it likes to tease you with these different points. Like, at first I thought that the inciting incident would be Coraline discovering the door, but nothing really happens for the first time that she discovers the door other than getting yelled at by her mom. So the true inciting incident comes in the middle of the night when Coraline is led to the doorway to the other world, discovering that it's far superior to the one she lives in, or so it seems for the time being. This is clearly something that upsets the status quo of the equilibrium, or the normal world, as nothing will ever be the same for Coraline or anybody else as she transcends that line between the real world and the dream world. So upon being spoiled rotten in this dream world, we get the break into two, where Coraline returns from the dream world after being tucked into bed by her other parents in a totally not creepy way at all. The line between this reality and the other reality starts to bleed, as Coraline reflects on her adventures with her other parents and other characters to their real, actual counterparts, where we sort of learn about the dream world from the neighbors, but not enough to convince Coraline that, hey, this might be a bad idea and you should probably stop going there. Coraline continues to have fun in this dream world, but after an incredible theater performance, she reunites with her other family. Other mother, or the Beldam, talks about how she could stay here forever if she wanted to for the small price of replacing her eyes with buttons. Understandably so, this freaks Coraline out as she tries to return to the real world by going back to bed, and when she wakes up, she thinks she's back in the real world, but unfortunately, she is stuck in the dream world. It all pretty much goes down from here. No more fun theater shows, no more fun rat shows or whatever. Yeah. Upon discovering the fate of the other mother's victims as well as her own parents, Coraline makes a deal to play a game where she finds these things, and she eventually does. She finds the ghost children's eyes, saves her parents, and ultimately destroys the Beldam and her fabricated world. Unfortunately, this is only the false climax, as in a false victory that implies that, oh, nothing else bad is going to happen. However, the true climax is when the Beldam's hand tries to steal the key to the other world from Coraline after escaping. Luckily, with Wyborn's help, Coraline destroys the hand and discards the key into the old well, where it's never seen again. As for the resolution, the residents of the Pink Palace hold a nice garden party where everything is back to normal and everyone is being connected for a change rather than being distant, strange neighbors. We are introduced to Wybe's grandmother, whose sister was a victim of the Beldams, and it is implied that Coraline will tell her the whole story of what she went through. Okay, those are the 6 main points of the film, and now we move on to our final questions. What are the opening and closing images of the film, and do they demonstrate some kind of change? As stated before, the opening image is of the Pink Palace where Coraline lives. It looks pretty drab and gray. Compared to the closing image, however, it is a beautiful day, and while there might not be anything new about the house itself, it's different because of the image of the cat grooming itself on the apartment sign. This signifies the change in Coraline's world in terms of family. She has not only rekindled a special connection with her parents, but has formed a new connection with her neighbors as well. Alrighty, that concludes the screenplay analysis of Coraline. And remember to never go through tiny doors you find in 150-year-old houses. No, seriously, don't. Alrighty, bye.